You're watching A News. I'm Bakhtiar Sanova, and let's see the top stories. Tensions in the Middle East are escalating as the United States and Israel launch their most intense strikes on Iran yet. At least 6 people have died after a bus caught fire in Switzerland. And Japan is marking the 15th anniversary since a devastating earthquake and tsunami. The catastrophe caused the worst nuclear accident since Chernobyl. First, it's now the 12th day since the US and Israel launched its attack on Iran, and intense airstrikes on Tehran increased on Tuesday night. Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps said that it was beginning the 35th wave of its operation, attacking American military bases in the Middle East and locations in central Israel, while the US military said it destroyed Iranian naval ships, including 16 mine layers near the Strait of Hormuz. Here is more.
The United States and Israel carried out the most intense airstrikes of the war on Tuesday, as the US destroyed several Iranian mine-laying vessels near the Strait of Hormuz, further raising tensions in the region. US President Donald Trump said on social media that American forces had destroyed 10 inactive boats suspected of laying naval mines, warning that any vessel attempting to mine the waterway would be dealt with quickly and violently. US Central Command later confirmed that a total of 16 Iranian mine-laying ships had been destroyed near the Strait of Hormuz, one of the world's most important energy choke points, where roughly a fifth of global oil and liquefied natural gas shipments pass through. Meanwhile, a suspected Iranian drone struck a US diplomatic support facility in Baghdad on Tuesday, hitting near a guard tower at the Baghdad Diplomatic Support Center close to the airport. Officials have not confirmed casualties, but the incident highlights growing threats to US personnel in the region. The developments come as Iran launched what it described as its most intense wave of strikes since the conflict began. Iranian state media said missiles targeted Israeli territory and US assets across the Middle East. Sirens sounded in parts of Israel, while Saudi Arabia said it intercepted several ballistic missiles and drones heading toward military and energy sites. Washington says the objectives of the operation are to destroy Iran's ballistic missile arsenal, weaken its regional proxy forces, and ensure Tehran never obtains a nuclear weapon.
At least 7 people have been killed and 11 injured after an Israeli strike hit the town of Al-Shahabia in southern Lebanon, according to the Lebanese Health Ministry. Our correspondent Maria Rodriguez Abalde reports from Kiryat Shimona in Israel, a town just 8 kilometers from the Lebanese border.
As Iran has threatened, its attacks on Israel have intensified, and tonight we have had up to 12 alerts for incoming missiles and drones over Tel Aviv and also Jerusalem. However, no injuries have been reported so far, according to the authorities. Once again, the north, where we are right now, is taking the worst of it because also is under Hezbollah's attacks. The towns just a few kilometers from Lebanon, like this one, remain under constant threat. Here, we can hear the sounds of artillery all over Golan Heights. A wave of Israeli airstrikes in Beirut's southern suburbs happened overnight, and this morning they targeted Hezbollah's command centers and weapon storage site and apartment building in central Beirut. Lebanese state media say this one marked the second strike in the city in recent days. The IDF says it also struck a Hezbollah command center in the coastal Lebanese city of Tyre. The Israeli government will immediately approve the state budget, focused on additional funding for the war. The Prime Minister, Defense Minister, and Finance Minister agreed to increase the defense budget by $13 billion in addition to setting aside more than half that amount for potential security scenarios. They considered these numbers not inexpensive. They call it an investment.
EU countries have been sending military assets to Cyprus after the British Royal Air Force naval base in Al-Qurtiri was struck by an Iranian drone last week. The Italian frigate Federico Martinengo, Francis Britannia and the Spanish warship Cristobal Colon were docked at the NATO installation at Souda Bay on the Greek island of Crete. Cyprus said it was not involved in operations against Iran, while EU countries stressed that the deployed assets were strictly for defensive purposes. Britain is strengthening protection around its military assets in the Middle East following a recent drone strike on a UK-based airbase in Cyprus. The Royal Navy destroyer HMS Dragon has now left Portsmouth for the eastern Mediterranean.
HMS Dragon has begun its journey to the eastern Mediterranean to join the UK's defensive operations in the region. The Type 45 destroyer left Portsmouth on Tuesday afternoon, more than a week after Britain's airbase in Cyprus was targeted by a drone following attacks by the United States and Israel on Iranian sites. The warship is expected to arrive in about a week and will be the UK's only naval vessel in the region. The move comes hours after the government placed a naval support ship, RFA Lime Bay, on heightened readiness to assist British nationals in the Middle East if needed. The decision to deploy the destroyer was taken about a week ago, but it took several days to prepare the ship for the journey, adding to scrutiny of Britain's military readiness. The government has defended its response, saying other assets had already been positioned in the region, including radar systems, air defense and F-35 fighter jets. HMS Dragon is a Type 45 air defense destroyer equipped with a Sea Viper missile system and advanced radar designed to track and neutralize airborne threats, according to the Royal Navy. The government has also pointed to close cooperation with the United States in preparing for and responding to their conflict, despite criticism from US President Donald Trump over Britain's level of support. The destroyer is expected to help protect RAF Akrotiri in Cyprus, which was hit by an Iranian-made drone earlier this month. Officials said the strike caused minimal damage to a hangar. Defense Secretary John Healey told the House of Commons the drone was believed to have been launched from Lebanon or Iraq. Prime Minister Keir Starmer earlier approved what he described as defensive US action against Iranian missile sites from UK bases. Zeynep Ferizadeh, A News, Manchester, United Kingdom.
Turkey has renewed calls for diplomacy to end the war in Ukraine, warning that the conflict should not be overshadowed by the ongoing crisis in the Middle East. President Recep Tayyip Erdogan discussed the issue in a phone call with his Ukrainian counterpart. Here are the details.
Turkish President Recep Tayyip Erdogan spoke by phone Tuesday with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky as Ankara renewed calls for diplomacy to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. According to a statement from the Turkish presidency, Erdogan told his Ukrainian counterpart that diplomatic efforts to end the conflict should not be disrupted by the ongoing crisis in the Middle East. He also stressed that renewed ceasefire talks between Russia and Ukraine should begin as soon as possible. Erdogan also raised concerns about navigational safety in the Black Sea, describing the issue as critically important for Turkey due to its geographic position and its role in regional maritime trade. Following the phone call, Zelensky said that Turkey had expressed its readiness to host a fresh round of trilateral talks involving Ukraine, Russia, and the United States. Ankara has previously played a mediating role in the conflict, maintaining working relations with both Kiev and Moscow. Despite being a long-standing member of NATO, Turkey has preserved diplomatic and economic ties with Russia, allowing it to facilitate dialogue between the two sides. In 2022, Istanbul hosted an early round of negotiations between Russian and Ukrainian delegations. But those talks ultimately failed to produce a ceasefire agreement, and the war has continued to rage unabated. Last month, the conflict entered its fifth year, with diplomatic efforts still ongoing amid shifting global geopolitical tensions. This is Adam Morrow for A News in Istanbul, Turkey.
Russia's Kremlin says British specialists were involved in a Ukrainian strike on the Russian city of Bryansk using British-made Storm Shadow missiles. Kremlin spokesman Dmitry Peskov called the attack barbaric and said Russia's so-called special military operation would continue. Russian authorities say the strike on Tuesday killed at least 6 people and injured 42 others. Ukraine has not commented on the claim.
Охуеть, он прямо на дорогу упал.
North Korea says it has fired strategic cruise missiles from a new naval destroyer. Leader Kim Jong-un watched the launch on Tuesday from a command center, according to state media. The missiles were launched from the Choi Hyun-class warship, which is expected to enter service soon. Officials say they flew for nearly 3 hours over the sea before hitting island targets. State television showed several missiles being launched in quick succession.
더하여야 한다고 하시면서 앞으로 함상 자동포는 3,000톤급 이하의 고속.
China is working towards its goal of building a fully modern military by 2035 as it focuses on developing advanced weaponry. This comes as the government announces plans to increase its military budget. Our correspondent in Beijing brings us more.
China will increase its military budget this year as it continues efforts to modernize its armed forces and strengthen national defense. The government said that the defense spending will rise by about 7% in 2026, bringing the total to around $270 billion. China has the second largest military budget in the world after the United States. The funding will support the modernization of the People's Liberation Army, including the development of advanced weapon systems, new technologies, and better training and equipment. China is working towards its long-term goal of building a fully modern military by 2035, with a stronger focus on innovation and integrated combat capabilities. The increase also comes at a time of rising regional tensions, including security concerns in the region. Chinese officials say that the spending is aimed at safeguarding national security and maintaining stability, while continuing reforms within the military, including recent anti-corruption efforts targeting senior officers. Manu Makhtoum, A News, Beijing.
A bus fire in western Switzerland has killed 6 people and others injured on Wednesday. At least 3 people were taken to hospital, and the police have opened a criminal investigation. Here is more on that story.
On Wednesday, a coach fire in a small town in western Switzerland claimed at least 6 lives, prompting the police to open a criminal investigation. Fribourg police reported that the coach was engulfed in flames on a road in the town of Curzes.
Regarding the incident, it occurred around 6:25 p.m, a little before 6:30 p.m, when calls alerted us to a bus on fire on Annukrittenstrasse. At that location, emergency services, police, paramedics and firefighters found a bus engulfed in flames. Injured individuals had exited the bus. The firefighters extinguished the blaze in several stages, and we have now determined that there are deceased individuals inside the bus. We will have to wait for my colleagues in the investigation to determine the number and identity of the deceased.
Frédéric Papot said, "At this stage, a deliberate act could be the cause of this tragedy. We really want to find out what happened."
Well, at this point, a deliberate act could be the cause of this tragedy. We really want to know what happened, and for that reason, we are appealing to the press and, through you, to the public and witnesses of this event.
The police also added that 3 injured people were taken to hospital.
Japan is marking the 15th anniversary since a devastating earthquake and tsunami struck the country's northeastern areas, triggering the world's worst nuclear disaster since the Chernobyl crisis in 1986. A memorial and recovery prayer ceremony was held in Fukushima City, where participants observed a moment of silence at 2:46 p.m., the exact time the earthquake struck in 2011. Fukushima Governor Masao Uchibori and Prime Minister Sanae Takaichi attended the ceremony, which was also joined by representatives of bereaved families.
The valuable lessons learned through the great sacrifices of this disaster must never fade from memory and will be passed on to future generations. Based on the experience of the Great East Japan earthquake, we will strengthen preparations for large-scale disasters expected in the future.
And how the catastrophe reshaped Japan and the challenges it brought. Here is more.
In 2011, at 2:46 p.m. on March 11th, massive earthquake and tsunami struck Japan, leaving more than 20,000 people dead or missing and triggering a triple meltdown at a nuclear plant. The catastrophe caused the worst nuclear accident since Chernobyl at Tokyo Electric Power Company's Fukushima Daiichi plant, 220 kilometers northeast of Tokyo. Hundreds of thousands of residents were forced to flee their homes after the disaster, which was classified a Level 7 event on the International Nuclear and Radiological Event Scale. Japan is now marking the 15th anniversary of the disaster. In August 2023, Japan began discharging more than 1 million tons of treated radioactive water from the plant into the ocean, a process expected to take decades to complete. Regulators say it is safe to release the water, which is filtered to remove most isotopes, although it still contains traces of tritium, an isotope of hydrogen that is difficult to separate from water. Japanese utilities have struggled to restart nuclear reactors since the 2011 Fukushima disaster, limiting nuclear power to just 8.5% of Japan's electricity supply in 2023. Before the accident, the country operated 54 reactors that provided around 30% of its energy needs. As decommissioning work at the Fukushima Daiichi nuclear power plant continues, its operator TEPCO plans to restart commercial operation of the number 6 reactor at the Kashiwazaki Kariwa nuclear power plant in Niigata Prefecture on March 18th, which would make it the first reactor owned by TEPCO to restart since 2011.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss how rising Middle East tensions are shaking global markets and driving oil prices higher. Stay tuned. Welcome back to A News. Our top story for discussion: rising tensions in the Middle East are sending shockwaves through global markets. Oil prices have surged and stock markets are trembling as fears grow that the conflict involving Iran could disrupt the Strait of Hormuz, the route for nearly 20% of the world's oil trade. Analysts warn that a prolonged crisis could trigger a wider economic shock and deepen global inflation. Iranian drone and missile strikes targeting Gulf states and energy infrastructure have intensified concerns about regional escalation, while policymakers in Washington weigh the strategic and economic costs of further action. To help us unpack the geopolitical and economic implications, we're joined by Jorge Costa Oliveira, political analyst speaking to us from Lisbon, Portugal. Mr. Oliveira, welcome to the program. Mr. Oliveira, oil prices surged sharply after disruptions in the Strait of Hormuz. How significant is this choke point for the global economy? Could a prolonged disruption of Gulf energy supplies trigger a global economic slowdown?
Yes, the answer obviously is yes. We have to see how long this current situation goes on, but not only the instability from the bombing and the war situation created, but especially now with the blockade of the Strait of Hormuz, the markets are already reacting. Prices of fuel are going up, energy prices are going up, and inevitably these are going to is starting to have economic consequences all over the world, more in Asia than in Europe, but it is inevitable that the cost of living is getting higher for everybody. And it all depends on I think it will all depend on how long this situation of blockade of the Strait of Hormuz will.
Mr. Oliveira, Iran has targeted oil infrastructure in several Gulf states. Is this part of a broader economic warfare strategy?
I think the general assessment that Iran is bombing oil infrastructures and logistic infrastructures in the region is part is part of an intent on putting those countries to press the United States to stop the bombing. Let's see if it works.
So how is the current crisis influencing global energy markets and inflation trends?
Well, it has started. I mean, obviously these things take time. It is, I just saw from 2.1 to 2.1. It will all depend how the markets perceive the point created by the of Hormuz to
It looks like we have internet connection failure. We are grateful to our guest for his insights. And now let's take a closer look at the key stories shaping the region. Today, the President of the European Council visits Azerbaijan for a meeting with President Ilham Aliyev. Our own Orkan Amashov has more details on the bilateral talks.
Antonio Costa, President of the European Council, is paying an official visit to Azerbaijan today. He's scheduled to meet President Aliyev very soon indeed. Well, the very first announcement regarding this very journey trip by the highest-ranking EU official was actually made by European sources, of course, back on the 6th of March, just a day after Azerbaijan's Nakhchivan airport was struck by an Iranian drone attack. And naturally, of course, many analysts would make an effort to connect with these two developments. To what extent they are connected or not is another question. There's no official confirmation, but as we know in international politics, nothing is coincidental. And this visit by Antonio Costa is taking place just days after EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen underlined the specific importance of the Middle Corridor, paying special attention to Azerbaijan and Armenia as two key countries at the heart of this connectivity agenda, even comparing the current process between Azerbaijan and Armenia to the situation in Europe after 1945, saying that in the same way coal and steel united European countries after 1945, today Azerbaijan and Armenia, former enemies, are actually building their future based on connectivity and trade. Naturally, energy is an important element of this relationship between EU and Azerbaijan. Back in 2009, these two countries signed a foundational document on partnership and cooperation. Back in 2022, when EU Commission President Ursula von der Leyen was here in Baku, back then memorandum of understanding in the energy field was signed as well. And back then the intention was to double natural gas supplies from Azerbaijan to the European Union and to reach the figure of 20 BCM by 2027. As things stand now, in early 2026, Azerbaijan sends about 12.5 BCM to European Union, to collectively to EU countries. And as President Aliyev recently mentioned, Germany and Austria have been added to that list of EU countries receiving Azerbaijani gas. On the whole, Azerbaijan sends natural gas to 16 European countries, out of which 10, of course, EU member countries. And intention is to increase, of course, cooperation, increase supplies, and European Union is naturally very much interested in this in the context of its own energy security. Well, today's meeting is bound to be historic by many standards. Antonio Costa is technically number one person within the hierarchy of the European Union, together with Ursula von der Leyen. And bearing in mind the backdrop against which this meeting is taking place, the current situation involving Islamic Republic of Iran and ongoing crisis, situation regarding the Hormuz and so forth, this meeting is of indeed critical significance. Well, Orkan Amashov, Elbrus Musayev, News, Baku, Azerbaijan.
Armenian Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan has addressed the European Parliament for the second time in 2 years. He highlighted early results of the Washington deal with Azerbaijan and Armenia's ambitions for closer ties with the European Union.
Prime Minister of Armenia, Nikol Pashinyan, addressed the European Parliament on Wednesday, his second speech since 2023. The address follows the Washington agreement he signed with Azerbaijan in August 2025 and comes ahead of Armenia's parliamentary elections on June 7th. Pashinyan cited the reopening of rail links as proof that the initial agreement is having a tangible impact.
Moreover, for the first time since independence in November 2025, a train passed through Azerbaijan, passed through Georgia, and reached the Republic of Armenia. I repeat, this is the first time since 1991. This happened after the president of Azerbaijan declared in October 2025 that he would lift the restrictions on rail transportation via Azerbaijan to Armenia, and I am grateful to the president of Azerbaijan for such a decision. We in turn announced that we are ready from today to ensure transit from Azerbaijan to Turkey and vice versa, because this is something we can do with our existing road network.
Pashinyan then turned to economic relations, thanking Georgia for its role in facilitating railway communication between Yerevan and Baku.
I hope that in the near future, Azerbaijan will also become an export destination for Armenia. And Armenia is already importing oil produce from Azerbaijan, which led to a decline in oil produce prices in our market and broke the decades-long monopolies in the oil produce market. I would also like to thank the Prime Minister of Georgia for supporting the railway communication between Armenia and Azerbaijan and the peace process more broadly.
Regarding EU integration, Pashinyan acknowledged that there is a complication. Armenia passed a law in March 2025 to begin the accession process, but he said the path to Brussels currently runs through Georgia.
Therefore, if the EU accepts Armenia as a full member, it would be great. If it doesn't, then we will still benefit because we will be a country that has fully complied with the EU standards. However, I should say frankly that the biggest problem on Armenia's EU integration path at the moment is the frozen states of the political dialogue between the EU and Georgia. Georgia is, for us, a path to the European Union, and we adopted the law on launching the process of Armenia's EU accession after Georgia was granted candidate status for European Union membership. It made Armenia's EU membership prospect tangible.
The European Union is currently holding visa liberalisation talks with Armenia. A dedicated EU-Armenia summit is planned for May 5th. Pashinyan's address comes as his civil contract party campaigns on a platform of lasting peace with Baku and closer ties with the West.
A railway corridor linking Russia and Armenia through Azerbaijan is once again in use. Today, another freight train carrying Russian grain departed from Belajari station in Baku, continuing deliveries. Ayten Shakirova reports from the exact station.
We're here at Belajari railway station in Baku, where another freight train carrying Russian grain to Armenia departed today. The shipment is traveling in transit through Azerbaijan. This time, the train consists of 11 wagons carrying 1,023 tons of grain. From here, it will head toward Büyükesi station on Azerbaijan's border with Georgia, before continuing through Georgia and onward to Armenia. This railway corridor reopened late last year after decades of inactivity. The first time traveled from Russia to Armenia through Azerbaijan in November 2025, the first time since the 1990s. Since then, more than 22,000 tons of Russian grain have been transported along this route in 320 wagons. In addition, 610 tons of fertilizer have been delivered in 9 wagons. Russian Railways says shipments along this corridor expected to continue on a regular basis, and the route could potentially be used for other types of cargo in the future. Ayten Shakirova, Zohrab Shirinov, A News.
Evacuations of foreign nationals from Iran through the Astara border crossing continue. In recent days, diplomats from several countries and hundreds of Chinese citizens have crossed into Azerbaijan using this route. In total, more than 2,000 people have now left Iran through Azerbaijan. A News' Chimnaz Shahlar reports from Astara border.
Evacuations from Iran through the Astara state border checkpoint are continuing. Earlier, members of the Dutch diplomatic corps, including the ambassador Emile de Bont, crossed into Azerbaijan through the Astara border crossing. Speaking to journalists after the evacuation, the ambassador said the Netherlands embassy in Tehran will temporarily continue its work from Azerbaijan.
Unfortunately, due to the security situation, we have decided to temporarily suspend our activities, our operations in Tehran, moving our embassy here now for safety reasons. And inshallah, we hope to return soon to Tehran when the situation is more calm. That's what I have to say. Thank you very much for receiving us in your country and into safety.
He also thanked the Azerbaijani authorities for ensuring a safe evacuations. Since yesterday, 9 diplomats from Algeria and 1 diplomat from Finland have also crossed the border through Astara. Foreign nationals continue to use this route to leave Iran. So far, nearly 600 Chinese citizens have been evacuated through the Astara crossing. Overall, more than 2,000 people have now been evacuated from Iran through Azerbaijan. At the same time, the trucks that delivered humanitarian aid from Azerbaijan to Iran have already returned across the Astara border. From here, at the Astara crossing, we continue to follow developments. I'm Shimnaz Shahlar with Nijat Kasımov, reporting from Astara for A News.
President of Turkey Recep Tayyip Erdogan addressed his party's parliamentary group meeting in the Turkish Grand National Assembly, calling for diplomacy and warning against further escalation in the region. Erdogan said Turkey doesn't view the people of the region through ethnic or sectarian divisions, urged an end to the conflict before it spreads further across the region. The Turkish president added that Ankara is continuing efforts to bring the sides back to negotiations.
Çatışmaların başladığı günden bugüne.
Since the beginning of the clashes, we have held contacts with Iran, the United States, and the countries of the region involved. Within this framework, I have conducted more than 20 phone calls. Our colleagues have likewise remained in constant contact with their counterparts. This war must be stopped before it escalates further and throws the entire region into flames. If diplomacy is given a chance, it is certainly possible to achieve this. We are patiently continuing our initiatives to return to the negotiating table and to bring diplomacy back into play. Both within our country and across our region, we have no aim other than justice, stability and peace. Whoever it may be, we have no designs on the sovereignty or territory of any country. But if anyone sets their sights on our lands, threatens our sovereignty, or seeks reckless confrontation, then, God willing, we will not hesitate to say, bring it on.
Historic landmarks in Iran's Isfahan have been severely damaged following recent US-Israel airstrikes, with officials describing the attacks as a cultural genocide against the city's centuries-old heritage. Our Turaj Shiralilo has more from Isfahan.
I'm reporting from central city of Isfahan, acknowledged as the cultural and arts capital of the Islamic world and Asia. A News was granted access to the destruction of the city's cultural heritage sites caused as a result of bombing of government buildings in Isfahan's congested old enclave dating back to 14th century. Governor General of Isfahan province, Mehdi Jamali Nejad, said that early estimate of devastations amount to $200 to $300 million. In an exclusive interview, he told A News that Chehel Sutun, or 40-column palace behind me, as well as sections of Imam Mosque in the city's Nakhchivan, or Mirror of the World Square, were among the sites seriously damaged by deliberate air raids on Monday and last Sunday.
Isfahan is a legendary city, a museum without a roof, with more than 22,000 historical sites. Each monument is like a word in a great book of history, and if even one of those words is destroyed, the whole book is harmed. Unfortunately, recent attacks damaged several landmarks, including Chehel Sutun Palace, Nakhchivan Square, and Imam Mosque. At least 14 sites suffered serious damage.
Isfahan is the identity of Iran, and it is so sad because in the heart of Isfahan and historical parts we have some museum and some historical palaces damaged by missiles.
Today, Iran held the official burial procession of high-ranking military commanders killed during the U.S.-Israeli invasion, together with former Supreme Leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei. His son, Ayatollah Mojtaba Khamenei, was announced as the third leader on Monday. The state program to lay to rest his father was delayed for security considerations, while there has been no recess in escalation of the conflict which broke out on 28th of February. In a new development, the Revolutionary Guards has sent a message on mobile phones saying Iran's attacks on Israel and U.S. interests in the region have inflicted them more than $25 billion, disclosing the rift between Washington and its European allies. Turash Shiralilu, reporting for A News from Chehel Sutun Palace in Isfahan.
Now we'll take a short break. Right after the break, we'll discuss United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres' Ramadan visit to Turkey and its refugee impact. See you shortly. Welcome back to A News. The United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres is set to visit Turkey as part of his annual Ramadan solidarity trip, highlighting the country's humanitarian role in hosting millions of displaced people. During the visit, he is expected to meet Turkish leaders, civil society groups and organizations working with refugees. Turkey currently hosts around 2.5 million refugees and asylum seekers, including more than 2.3 million Syrians, making it one of the world's largest refugee hosting countries. To discuss the significance of this visit and Turkey's role in global humanitarian diplomacy, we're joined by Yashar Sarı, director of the Heydar Aliyev Center for Eurasian Studies at Ibn Khaldun University in Istanbul. Mr. Sarı, welcome to the program and thank you for being with us.
Thank you for the invitation.
Mr. Sarı, how significant is the UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres' Ramadan solidarity visit to Turkey from diplomatic perspective, and why do you think Turkey was chosen for this year's solidarity trip?
I mean, the first thing is that you already mentioned the Guterres set to travel to Turkey as part of his annual solidarity trip marking the Muslim holy month of the Ramadan. So yes, that's the first. The second thing is to, as you know, the Guterres' previous job, he was the High Commissioner for the refugees, and Turkey is one of the largest refugee population in the world, with nearly 2.5 million refugees and asylum seekers, and over 2.3 millions of them Syrians. And so he, in that way, both he attended his solidarity trip because of he's doing this one every year in different Muslim countries, and the Muslims to deal, I mean, the working with the Muslim communities. The second thing is to, because of Turkey's active involvement to providing security for the refugees, he once honored the Turkish government and those civil societies working in this field. The last part of his trip also, he will receive the Atatürk International Peace Prize behalf of the UN personnel worldwide, because they are the UN personnel working hard to providing peace and providing assistance to people who needs.
Mr. Sarı, as we have already mentioned, Turkey hosts one of the world's largest refugee populations. How has this shaped its international humanitarian reputation?
I mean, this good process is, of course, mainly started with this Syrian civil war, and those people who suffer under the Ba'ath regimes and their violence against these people. Turkey opened the borders. I mean, without hesitating, opened the border, and they showed its hands to these people who are suffering. And let's not forget that at that time, European Union member countries closed the border. They didn't want to have the Syrian refugees passing to Europe. So in that sense, Turkey took the responsibility, even though Turkish economic condition is comparing the relatively European countries is not that good, but the Turkey providing assistance to those people over 10 years, maybe more, for some of them. So that's and in comparing the Turkey's GDP per refugee, the Turkey is the several years the highest, largest, the highest GDP spending for these refugees. In that sense, Turkey had the huge number of the refugees. One time, it's almost 5 million refugees were in Turkey. But after the peaceful condition emerged in Syria, some of them went back to their own country.
So do you think the international community is providing sufficient support to countries like Turkey that host large refugee populations?
That's unfortunately the UN already had a past rate, the certain percentage which expecting countries to providing the assistance to those people who need either refugees or asylum seekers or the internally displaced. Assistance are not enough, and already we know what happening in Middle East. Not only Middle East, by the way, war is because of the war happening in Middle East, but in Africa, and in Africa, different countries and the people are suffering, and we don't see them in media. They are media ignoring those people. In that sense, what we can say that those countries who developed countries, which we call them, are not sufficiently providing assistance to these people who need those help.
Mr. Sarı, what role do Turkish civil society organizations play in supporting refugees on the ground?
The Turkish civil society organizations are very active in Gaza, in different parts of the world. So they are providing the not only the basic needs, which is the food, shelter, and the protection, but also providing education and providing the certain assistance, which especially those young people, children, and the elderly people need, and also providing certain health assistance. The opening the hospitals and helping those people, those who are suffering, those who cannot reach those services, which is important for the human life.
Turkey has also been active in mediation and humanitarian diplomacy. Could this visit reinforce that role internationally?
The visit is already significant. Choosing Turkey this year by the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres.
It looks like we have lost internet connection due to internet connection with our guest. We're grateful to him for his insights. And that's the news for this hour. Stay tuned to A News for more updates. Thank you for watching.